Emily Carter pressed her back against the library door, her hands trembling so hard the candlestick nearly slipped from her fingers. She had walked in expecting to find her fiancé. She had found him, but not alone. Edward's voice carried through the dark. "She'll never know." And Lydia laughed. Emily did not scream. She did not cry. She simply stood there while everything she had believed about her life turned to ash in her chest. If this story already has your heart pounding, subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Boston had been sweltering that summer, the kind of heat that crawled under your collar and stayed there thick and suffocating even after the sun went down. But inside the Harrington estate, the grandest house on Beacon Hill, 100 candles blazed in iron chandeliers, and the air smelled of beeswax rosewater and money. Emily Carter stood near the edge of the ballroom and told herself she was happy. She had been telling herself that for 6 months. She was 22 years old, the only daughter of George Carter, one of Boston's most respected merchant families. She was engaged to Edward Whitmore, handsome, ambitious 26, the kind of man fathers approved of and mothers envied. The wedding was set for September. The invitations had already gone out. She was supposed to be happy. "You look lovely tonight," said a voice beside her. It was Mrs. Aldrich, a wide woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, the kind of woman who collected other people's misfortunes and wore them like jewelry. "Thank you, Mrs. Aldrich," Emily said, smiling the way her mother had taught her, bright, warm, and revealing nothing. "Edward seems in fine spirits." Mrs. Aldrich's gaze swept the room. "Though I haven't seen him in some time, nor your dear Lydia." Emily kept her smile exactly where it was. "I'm sure they're about somewhere." "Of course," Mrs. Aldrich said, and the way she said it, slow, almost sweet, planted a seed of cold in the center of Emily's chest. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself that for 10 more minutes, standing with her lemonade growing warm in her hand, watching the dancers turn slow circles on the polished floor, watching the candlelight catch the jewels at women's throats, watching the room the way a person watches a fire, beautiful and dangerous, and not quite real. Then she went looking for Edward. She checked the card room first. He wasn't there. She checked the East Parlor, where a group of older gentlemen had gathered to argue about shipping routes and President Madison's latest decisions. She smiled politely and moved on. She checked the veranda, where young couples had slipped away from their chaperones to stand closer together than propriety allowed. Edward was not on the veranda. She was nearly back to the ballroom when she heard his laugh. It was unmistakable, that particular low, easy sound he made when he was comfortable, when he thought no one was watching. She had always loved that laugh. It had been one of the first things she loved about him 3 years ago, when they met at her father's counting house, and he had charmed everyone in the room without seeming to try. The laugh came from the library. The door was nearly shut, just a thin line of candlelight bleeding through the gap. Emily told herself she was being foolish. She told herself she would open that door and find Edward talking business with one of his associates, and she would feel embarrassed for thinking anything else, and tomorrow she would laugh about it with Lydia. She pushed the door open. They didn't hear her at first. Edward was leaning against the reading table, his coat jacket draped over the back of a chair, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He was laughing. And Lydia Monroe. Emily's Lydia, her best friend since they were girls of 12, her confidant, her closest companion in all the world. Lydia was standing close enough to him that their arms nearly touched. Her head tipped back, her own laughter running soft and private between them. Emily stood in the doorway. For one long, terrible moment, none of it made sense. It looked almost innocent. 2 people laughing in a library. Nothing scandalous, nothing obvious. But then Lydia reached out and straightened the lapel of Edward's waistcoat, her fingers lingering just a moment too long. And Edward caught her hand, and neither of them pulled away. Emily's lemonade glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. They spun around. Lydia went white. "Emily!" Edward dropped Lydia's hand and straightened. A muscle worked in his jaw. He didn't reach for Emily. He didn't take a single step toward her. He simply stood there, recalibrating. She could see it happening behind his eyes, the quick, practiced adjustment of a man deciding which version of the truth to offer. "It isn't what you're thinking," he said. Emily heard her own voice come out very quiet. "What am I thinking, Edward? You're thinking something foolish." He walked toward her slowly, the way a person walks toward something they mean to contain. "You're upset. You've misread. Don't." The word came out of her like a door slamming. She took a step back. "Don't tell me what I'm reading. I have eyes." "Emily." Lydia's voice broke on her name. She took a step forward, her hands out, her face crumpling. "Please listen." "How long?" Emily asked. Neither of them answered immediately. That silence was its own answer, wide and ugly and sufficient. "How long, Lydia?" Emily's voice didn't shake. She was distantly astonished by that. Everything inside her had gone sideways, and still her voice came out steady. "Tell me, please. How long?" Lydia's hands dropped to her sides. Her chin came up slightly the way it always did when she was bracing herself. 4 months. 4 months. The wedding invitations had gone out 6 weeks ago. Emily had stood beside Lydia while her mother addressed the envelopes. Lydia had pressed the wax seals with her own hand. 4 months, Emily repeated. It happened, Lydia said. "Emily, I swear to you, I never meant. You never meant for me to find out," Emily said. "That is the only thing you didn't mean." "That's not fair." "Fair." Emily laughed, a short, strange sound she didn't quite recognize. "You've been meeting my fiancé in secret for 4 months, and you want to talk to me about fair." Edward moved then. He stepped between them, not toward Emily, but between them, positioning himself. She understood suddenly, not as her defender, but as a man managing a situation. His voice dropped to something careful and deliberate. "Emily, you are going to cause a scene." She looked at him, really looked at him, the easy handsomeness of his face, the calculated calm of his expression, the way his eyes were already working the problem of her. And she understood something she should have understood long before this moment. Edward Whitmore had never once looked at her the way a man looks at a woman he loves. He had looked at her the way a man looks at something useful. "Was it ever real?" she asked. He hesitated. That hesitation was its own kind of violence. "The arrangement suited us both," he said finally. "Your family's connections, my ambitions. That is not nothing, Emily. That is in fact the foundation of most successful marriages." "The arrangement," she said softly. "You knew what this was." "I knew what I thought it was." Her voice was still quiet. It frightened her a little how quiet she could be when something inside her was coming apart at the seams. "I thought it was a courtship. I thought you were going to be my husband. I thought—" She stopped, breathed. "It doesn't matter what I thought." She turned to Lydia. "And you? You stood beside me at my mother's table, and you sealed those envelopes. You looked me in the eye, and you called me your dearest friend." Lydia's eyes filled. "Emily, don't." Emily held up one hand. "I can't hear your name for me right now. I cannot stand here and listen to you say my name like I'm the one who's done something wrong." She turned, walked out of the library, and pulled the door shut behind her with a soft, precise click. For a moment, she stood in the corridor with her back to the library door and her hands flat against it, pressing into the wood, steadying herself. The sounds of the ballroom drifted down the hall. Music, laughter, the clink of glasses, a world utterly unaware that hers had just ended. She would not cry in the corridor of the Harrington estate. She straightened her spine. She smoothed her dress. She walked back toward the sound of music. But the world she walked back into was not the same world she had left. Mrs. Aldrich found her within 60 seconds. "My dear, you look quite pale." The woman's eyes were bright with something that had nothing to do with concern. "Are you feeling well?" "Perfectly well," Emily said. "Only, I couldn't help noticing you came from the direction of the library, didn't you?" And I believe I saw Mr. Whitmore slip in that direction some time ago, and Miss Monroe as well." A pause perfectly timed. "Strange coincidence." Emily smiled her mother's smile. "I was looking for some quiet. The heat, you know." "Of course," Mrs. Aldrich said. And that tone again, that slow, deliberate sweetness, told Emily that whatever she thought she was hiding, Mrs. Aldrich had already seen it and was already composing the version she'd share at breakfast tomorrow. She excused herself and moved deeper into the room. But it was too late. She could feel it already, the subtle shift in the atmosphere around her. The way certain conversations paused as she passed. The way eyes met and slid away. In a room like this, among people like this, information moved faster than candle smoke. Someone had heard something, or seen something, or guessed, and that was enough. "Miss Carter." The voice came from her left. A man she didn't know, or rather a man she knew only by reputation, which was a different thing entirely. He was tall with broad shoulders, and the kind of stillness about him that didn't come from idleness, but from absolute self-possession. He held a glass of something dark at his side untouched. His coat was dark blue, well cut, and he wore it the way men wear clothes when clothes are something they've stopped thinking about, like he had better things to occupy his attention. He was perhaps 35, with a jaw that looked like it had been decided upon, rather than merely grown, and dark eyes that had been watching the room the way a man watches a game he already knows the outcome of. Nathaniel Harrington. It was his house. She had seen him once briefly 2 years ago at a trade dinner her father attended. She had not been formally introduced. She knew what everyone in Boston knew about him, that he had inherited his father's land holdings at 22 and tripled them by 30, that he had the ear of half the state legislature, that he had never married, never courted, and never seemed to notice that either fact was considered unusual. "Mr. Harrington," she said, and was proud of how steady her voice came out. "You appear to be looking for a place to stand," he said. It was such a precise observation, not rude, not kind, just accurate, that she almost laughed. "I appear to be standing right here." "You appear to be standing in the center of a room that has decided something about you in the last 10 minutes, he said, "and you are considering whether to stay or go, and you haven't made up your mind yet." She looked at him directly. "You're very observant for a man I've never spoken to." "I'm observant generally. It's a useful habit." He took a slow sip of his drink. "Edward Whitmore's fiancé, George Carter's daughter. You've been engaged for 6 months. The wedding is in September." "You know a great deal about me." "I know a great deal about most people in this room," he said. "It's my room, but I know slightly more about you tonight than I did an hour ago, because an hour ago nothing interesting had happened yet." Something about that made her breath catch, not because it was cruel, but because it was so plainly honest. The way he said it, he wasn't performing sympathy or performing cruelty. He was simply telling her the truth. And in this room full of people who had just spent 10 minutes telling her things that were not the truth. There was something almost violent about his plainness. "Mr. Harrington," she said carefully, "what exactly do you think happened an hour ago?" He tilted his head slightly. "I think you went looking for your fiancé. I think you found him somewhere he shouldn't have been with someone who should have known better. And I think you came back to this room because you are not the kind of woman who runs." Emily said nothing. "I also think," he continued, his voice dropping just slightly, not for privacy, but for precision, "that you are about 30 seconds away from Mrs. Aldrich making a point of telling the wrong person what she believes she witnessed. And once she does that, the story of tonight will be written for you, and you will spend the next 3 years trying to correct it." Emily looked across the room. Mrs. Aldrich was in conversation with 2 women whose opinions functioned in this social circle like newspaper headlines. Her hands moved expressively as she spoke. "She's already started," Emily said. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "She has." A long moment passed between them. "What," Emily asked slowly, "would you suggest?" Nathaniel turned to look at her for the first time fully. Not the assessing glance he'd been offering, but a direct look as if he were settling something in his own mind. "I'd suggest," he said, "that you stop looking like a woman waiting to be defined by what just happened to her, and start looking like a woman who doesn't much care what happened because she has somewhere more important to be. That's easier said than accomplished. Most things worth doing are. He set his glass down on a passing servant's tray. My mother is across the room. She's been trying to get me to speak with Senator Harlow's wife for the better part of an hour. If you were standing with me when I finally conceded to that conversation, people would spend the rest of the evening trying to understand why rather than repeating whatever Mrs. Aldrich is currently saying. Emily stared at him. I'm offering to give you 10 minutes, he said. What you do with them is your affair. She understood in that moment that this man was not offering her rescue. He was offering her leverage. There was a considerable difference. She straightened. 10 minutes, she said. 10 minutes, he agreed. And without further ceremony, Nathaniel Harrington offered her his arm, and Emily Carter took it, and they walked across the ballroom floor together, while the entire room turned to watch, and while it watched, it forgot at least for the moment whatever story it had been preparing to tell about her. Edward came back into the ballroom 12 minutes later, Lydia pale and silent, a careful distance behind him. He scanned the room, found Emily almost immediately, and went very still. Emily was standing with Nathaniel Harrington, deep in conversation with Senator Harlow's wife, laughing at something the older woman had said. She was not looking at Edward. She was not performing her lack of attention. She simply was not looking at him. Edward's jaw tightened. He crossed the room. Emily. She turned as if mildly surprised. Edward, I wondered where you'd gone. His eyes flicked to Nathaniel. I wasn't aware you were acquainted with Mr. Harrington. I wasn't either, Emily said pleasantly, until tonight. There was a silence. Whitmore, Nathaniel said. His voice carried no particular inflection. He did not offer his hand. Harrington, Edward said. He smiled the smile of a man who is recalibrating again, who has walked into a room and found it rearranged and needs a moment to locate the exits. I wasn't aware you knew my fiancé. We've only just met, Nathaniel said. She's an interesting conversationalist. You're a lucky man. Something passed through Edward's eyes. He recognized Emily thought that he was being handled, that the power in this specific corner of the room had shifted in a way he hadn't arranged and couldn't undo. Edward Whitmore was not accustomed to being handled. We should speak, Edward said to Emily low and private. Later. Of course, Emily said. When there's time. She turned back to Senator Harlow's wife and resumed the conversation. She didn't let herself shake until she was alone in the carriage home 2 hours later. Her father sat across from her, his hat in his lap, watching her with the particular careful attention of a man who has noticed something is wrong and is deciding whether to ask. George Carter was 58, broad-shouldered and silver-haired, a man who had built his fortune through patience and precision, and the ability to read a situation faster than most people could finish a sentence. You had a difficult evening, he said finally. It wasn't a question. Yes, she said. He waited. I went looking for Edward, she said. Her voice was steady. She had decided in the 2 hours since the library that she was going to be steady about this. She was going to be steady about this if it took everything she had. I found him in the library with Lydia. Her father's face changed, subtle, contained, but she knew that face. She had been reading that face for 22 years. Define found. They were not conducting business, she said. A long silence. How long? He said. 4 months. Lydia told me. Her father looked out the carriage window at the dark streets moving past. A muscle worked in his jaw, slow, deliberate, like something being held in place by effort. I would like to break the engagement, Emily said. Yes, her father said immediately. She hadn't expected him to say yes immediately. She had braced for argument for the pragmatic speech about alliances and business and the practical realities of their position. Edward Whitmore's family had connections her father used. Breaking the engagement would cost something. You're sure, she said. Emily. His voice was rough at the edges. That man sat at my dinner table and called you his intended. He looked me in the eye. "Whatever it costs to be rid of him, we will pay it, and consider it a bargain." She felt something in her chest crack open, just slightly, just enough. She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in the carriage. She was not going to cry until she was in her own room with the door shut. "The talk will be difficult," she said. "The talk will be what it will be." He reached across and covered her hand with his. "You let me worry about the talk. You worry about tonight." She nodded. She turned to look out her own window at the dark city passing by the gaslit streets, the black water of the harbor somewhere beyond the rooftops. She had walked into that ballroom, engaged, respected, and certain of her future. She was riding home with nothing but the knowledge that the two people she had trusted most in the world had been lying to her for 4 months. And somewhere in the back of her mind, quieter than everything else, was the image of Nathaniel Harrington setting his glass on a passing tray and saying without ceremony, "I'm offering to give you 10 minutes. What you do with them is your affair." She didn't know what that meant yet. She didn't know what any of tonight meant yet, but she was alive. She was upright. She had not crumbled in that ballroom, had not given Mrs. Aldrich the spectacle she was looking for, had not let Edward Whitmore stand over her and explain the truth of her own life to her. She was still standing. That would have to be enough. For tonight, that would have to be enough. The carriage rolled on through the Boston summer dark, and Emily Carter sat with her hands folded in her lap, and her jaw set, and her eyes dry, and she told herself the only thing she knew for certain, that whatever came next, she would face it on her feet. She had no idea yet that what came next would change everything. The morning after the Harrington ball, Boston woke up and went about its business, and so did its rumors. Emily heard them before she even left the house. She was still at the breakfast table, her tea growing cold, her toast untouched when the housemaid came in with fresh linens and a particular careful blankness on her face that Emily had learned over 22 years to read exactly right. That blankness meant the girl had heard something. That blankness meant whatever she'd heard was about Emily. "Sally," Emily said. The girl stopped. "Ma'am." "What are people saying?" Sally's hands tightened on the linens. "Miss Carter, I'm not asking you to protect me," Emily said. "I'm asking you to tell me the truth. I'd rather know." A pause, then quietly. "They're saying Mr. Whitmore and Miss Monroe were seen together, in the library, and that you found them." Emily set down her teacup. "And what else?" Sally hesitated. Some are saying that you made a scene." "I didn't make a scene." "No, miss, I know that." Sally's voice was careful, kind. "But that's what some are saying." Emily absorbed this. She had expected it. She had told herself in the carriage last night that she expected it. But expecting a thing and sitting with it at your breakfast table while your toast went cold were two entirely different experiences. "Thank you, Sally," she said. "That will be all." She sat alone in the dining room for another 10 minutes, and then she stood up, squared her shoulders, and went to find her father. George Carter was in his study, already dressed, already at his desk, already from the look of the papers spread before him deep into the problem of Edward Whitmore. He looked up when she came in, and something in his expression told her he had been expecting her. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "I sent a messenger to Whitmore this morning," he said, "early, before the house was properly awake. I told him I expected him here by 10 o'clock. Emily straightened. "Father, this is my business too, Emily." His voice was quiet but absolute. "That man came to me. He asked for my daughter. He sat in this room and gave me his word. That makes it my business." She understood. She didn't argue. "What will you say to him?" she asked. Her father's jaw set. "I will say what needs to be said. The engagement is finished. Any contractual arrangement between our families is to be reviewed by my solicitor, and if Edward Whitmore says one word against your name in this city, he will find that my memory for business disputes is considerably longer than his connections can reach." It was the most she had ever heard her father say at one stretch about anything personal. She felt a wave of something gratitude-grief, and something that wasn't quite either move through her chest. "He'll deny it," she said. He can deny it all he likes. Lydia Monroe told you herself. And I intend to speak with her father this afternoon. Emily's head came up. Father, please don't. Thomas Monroe has been my friend for 20 years, George said. He deserves to know what his daughter has done, not as punishment, as truth. Men who raise their children without truth do them no favors. He paused. I will be kind about it, but I will tell him. Emily looked at her hands. She thought about Lydia, about the way Lydia's chin had lifted when she finally answered 4 months, and how that particular gesture had always meant Lydia was ashamed of something she was refusing to fully admit. They had grown up together. They had shared every secret since they were 12 years old. Every secret, apparently, except the one that mattered most. I don't know what to do about Lydia, Emily said quietly. You don't have to know yet, her father said. You've had the night. You're allowed to not know yet. She nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I need to go out today. Her father looked at her. If I stay in this house, she said, people will say I'm hiding. And if people say I'm hiding, they'll decide why, and whatever they decide will be worse than the truth. She met his eyes. I need to be seen. I need to walk through this city with my head up before the story gets any bigger than it already is. Her father studied her for a long moment. Then he said simply, Your mother's daughter. She stood up. She smoothed her dress. She went to find her hat. The market on Hanover Street was busy enough that she could move through it without being an object of attention, but not so crowded that she could disappear. That was what she needed, presence without spectacle. She needed to be seen being ordinary because ordinary was the most powerful argument against scandal. She had been there perhaps 20 minutes examining bolts of linen at a merchant's stall, with careful attention she didn't feel when she heard her name. She turned. Margaret Hale. 28, married 3 years. The wife of a shipping partner of her father's was standing 5 feet away with a basket over her arm and a particular expression on her face. Not malicious, not exactly, but the expression of a woman who had heard something and was deciding in real time how to handle the fact that the subject of that something was now standing directly in front of her. Emily, Margaret said again, warmth forced into the word like a foot into a too small boot. I didn't expect to see you out this morning. Good morning, Margaret, Emily said. It's a fine day. Yes. A pause. Are you well? Quite well, thank you. Only I heard. Margaret stopped herself. Then, with a visible effort at charity, I heard the Harrington ball was lovely. It was a beautiful evening, Emily said. Another pause, longer this time, weighted with everything that wasn't being said. Emily, Margaret said, finally lowering her voice. Whatever happened last night, people are already talking, and some of what they're saying isn't. I just want you to know that not everyone believes Margaret. Emily's voice was gentle. Thank you, truly. But I have linens to look at, and I believe you have your shopping. Shall we not let Mrs. Aldrich's imagination ruin both our mornings? Margaret blinked. Then slowly she smiled, a real one this time, surprised out of her. You are something else, Emily Carter. I'm trying to be, Emily said. She turned back to the linens, but her hands, she noticed, had started to shake. She was 3 stalls further along when she saw Lydia. It was not planned. It was not the kind of encounter either of them would have chosen. Lydia came around the corner of a vegetable stall with her maid at her elbow and stopped dead when she saw Emily. For a moment, one long crystalline moment, neither of them moved. Lydia looked terrible. That was the first thing Emily noticed and immediately felt guilty for noticing. Lydia's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed in the way that meant she had been crying for hours. She held her basket with both hands as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Emily, she said. The sound of her own name in Lydia's voice did something complicated to Emily's chest. 6 months ago, 6 weeks ago, she would have crossed any distance to reach Lydia when she looked like that. She would have asked what was wrong and meant it with her whole heart. She didn't cross the distance now. Lydia, she said. Lydia's eyes filled immediately. "I've been wanting to. I tried to send a note this morning, but I didn't know what to say, and I—" Her voice broke. She pressed her lips together, steadied herself. "I am so sorry, Emily. I know that isn't enough. I know nothing I say is enough. But I need you to know that I am sorry." Emily looked at her, at this face she had known her whole life. This face she had trusted completely. This face that had looked her in the eye 100 times in the last 4 months and said nothing. "How did it start?" Emily asked. Lydia looked startled by the question. She had expected anger maybe. Silence maybe. Not a question. "How did it start, Lydia? I want to understand." Lydia's hands tightened on the basket. "It was at your father's dinner. In March. You were helping your mother in the kitchen and Edward and I were left in the parlor, and he said something he was funny, and I laughed, and then he looked at me in a way that—" She stopped. "That's not an excuse. I know it isn't." "No," Emily said. "It isn't. I tried to stop it," Lydia said. "After the first time. I told him it couldn't happen again, and he said—" A pause. Her jaw worked. "He said that you wouldn't be hurt because you didn't love him either." "Not really." The words landed like a stone dropped in still water. Emily felt the ripple move through her slowly outward-reaching places she hadn't expected to feel. "And you believed him," she said. "I wanted to," Lydia said. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like you found a reason," Emily said. "Because you needed one." Lydia didn't deny it. They stood there in the middle of a busy market street with people moving around them, and summer heat bearing down, and the whole ordinary world going on in all directions. And neither of them spoke for a long moment. "He was going to marry you anyway," Lydia said finally. Her voice was very quiet. "I want you to know that. Whatever he felt, whatever he does, he was always going to go through with the marriage. The arrangement was too important to him. His family needs your father's connections. He needed the wedding to happen." Emily absorbed this. "So I was the arrangement," she said. "You were always the arrangement to him. I think some part of me told myself that meant it wasn't really betrayal. That you'd be married and secure and he'd—" Lydia's voice collapsed. I know how it sounds." "It sounds," Emily said carefully, "like you decided the wrong things about me in order to do what you wanted. And then you stayed quiet about it for 4 months while I planned a wedding I didn't know was a lie." Lydia's head dropped. A tear slid down her face. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Emily said. "I want to be honest with you about that. I don't know yet." "I know," Lydia whispered, "but I need you to understand something." Emily waited until Lydia looked up. "You were my closest friend. You were the person I told things to that I told no one else. And I would have done anything, to protect you. If you had come to me and said, 'Emily, I think I have feelings for Edward,' it would have broken my heart. But I would have listened. I would have tried." Lydia's face crumpled. "I know. Instead you chose to lie. For 4 months you chose it again and again." Emily's voice didn't shake, but something behind it was working hard to hold still. "That's what I have to find a way to live with." She picked up her basket. She straightened her spine. "Go home, Lydia," she said, not unkindly. "Take care of yourself. Whatever happens between us, take care of yourself." She walked away. She did not let herself think about the sound of Lydia's breath catching. She walked and she kept walking, and she held herself together with something that felt less like strength and more like the absolute refusal to be anything else. Edward arrived at the Carter house at 10:30. Emily knew he was there because she heard his voice in the foyer, that particular confident pitch he used with servants, the tone that said he expected to be accommodated and hadn't yet considered the possibility that he wouldn't be. She heard her father's man say very politely that Mr. Carter was in his study and would Mr. Whitmore please wait in the parlor. She stayed upstairs. She had told her father she would stay upstairs. She had told herself it was because she didn't need to be involved, because her father was handling it, because she had already said what she needed to say. but she stood at the top of the stairs and listened. She couldn't hear words. The study door was thick, but she could hear tone. Her father's voice measured and deliberate. Edward's voice at first smooth, and then after perhaps 10 minutes, edged with something that was working to stay controlled and not quite managing it. Then her father's voice again shorter than before. Then silence. Then the front door. Her father appeared in the foyer below. He looked up and saw her on the landing. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "It's done." She came downstairs. "How did he take it?" she asked. "Badly," her father said. "At first he tried to explain, 'I won't repeat what he said, it wasn't worth repeating.' Then he tried to suggest that a quiet resolution would serve everyone's interests. Then when I told him my solicitor would be reviewing our business arrangements, he became considerably less composed." "Did he—" She stopped. "Did he say anything about my name?" Her father's expression told her everything before he spoke. He suggested that whatever had happened was not entirely his responsibility, that there were, his word was, misunderstandings that you had perhaps misinterpreted. She felt a cold, clear anger move through her, clean almost, clarifying. "Of course he did," she said. "I told him," her father said, "that if he repeated anything of that nature to anyone in this city, I would ensure that every merchant and every investor and every legislator with whom he hopes to do business heard a complete and accurate account of what I found in my review of his family's financial dealings, which I intend to review very carefully indeed." Emily looked at her father. "Do you actually have something on him?" George Carter's expression didn't change. "I have 20 years of careful attention to everything that happens in this city's business community. Whether or not I have something specific is beside the point. He doesn't know what I have. And a man like Edward Whitmore will not risk it." She felt a sudden fierce rush of love for her father that she didn't know how to say. So she didn't try. She just nodded. "What now?" she asked. "Now," her father said, "we go about our lives, and we allow time to do what time does." Time, it turned out, moved slower than Emily had hoped and faster than she feared. The first week was the worst. The invitations stopped. Not all of them. Some people were kind, or at least careful, and continued their usual courtesies. But the ones that stopped were pointed in their absence. The Aldrich dinner. The weekly card party at the Harlow house. 2 afternoon calls that had been regular fixtures of her social calendar for 3 years. She noticed each one. She did not mention them. She went out anyway to church, to the market, to the small lending library on School Street, where she had been a member since she was 17, and she moved through the city with her head level and her expression pleasant, and her insides doing something she refused to examine too closely. The second week brought a different kind of difficulty. People began to be kind. She had not anticipated that kindness would be harder than cruelty, but it was because kindness required a particular kind of performance from her, a performance of gracious acceptance. And gracious acceptance meant acknowledging the thing that was being sympathized with, and acknowledging it required letting it be real in a way that she was still 17 days after the Harrington ball, trying not to let it be. Mrs. Harlow, the senator's wife, the woman she had been speaking with when Nathaniel Harrington brought her into that conversation, sent a note. Warm, brief, and specific, she was hosting a small dinner the following Thursday, and she hoped Emily would honor them with her presence. Emily read the note 3 times. Then she wrote back and accepted. It was the first social engagement she had agreed to since the ball. When her father saw the reply on the hall table, he said nothing, but he looked at her with something in his eyes that made her chest ache in a way that wasn't entirely bad. The Thursday dinner was 14 people in a room meant for 12, which meant everyone was slightly too close together and conversation was slightly too loud. And it was exactly the right atmosphere for a woman who was trying to exist in public without being examined. She arrived alone, which was noted but not commented upon. She spoke well, ate little, and kept her attention moving around the table so that no single person could get enough of it to push beyond pleasantries. It was going well. It was going almost well. Then 40 minutes into the evening, the dining room door opened and Nathaniel Harrington walked in. Mrs. Harlow looked up with the particular expression of a woman whose carefully arranged table has just been disrupted in a way she hadn't planned for and isn't entirely displeased about. "Mr. Harrington, what a surprise!" "I hope I'm not inconvenient," he said, without sounding as though he considered the possibility seriously. "Never," Mrs. Harlow said. "We'll make room." There was a shuffling 2 chairs squeezed into a gap, a servant adding place settings. And when the shuffling was done, Nathaniel Harrington was seated directly across the table from Emily Carter. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Harrington," she said. He reached for his wine glass as though he had been there the whole evening. "How have you been keeping?" The question was ordinary. The fact that he was asking it here in this room with these people listening without appearing to listen was not ordinary at all. "Well," she said, "thank you. I'm glad to hear it." She understood in that moment that he had known she would be here, that this was not a coincidence, that Nathaniel Harrington, who had offered her 10 minutes at his own ball and then apparently thought about it afterward, had arranged to be in this room at this table across from her for reasons that were his own, and that she had not yet been given a reason to understand. The conversation around the table moved on. The senator made a point about tariffs. His wife made a point about gardens. Someone said something about the heat, and everyone agreed that it had been the hottest summer in memory. Through all of it, Nathaniel Harrington said almost nothing. But 3 times precisely, 3 times when a conversational current began to move in a direction that might have stranded Emily in the position of subject under discussion, he said something, a question redirected at someone else, an observation that pulled the room's attention. Elsewhere, a short specific comment that reoriented the table towards safer ground. He did it without drawing attention to what he was doing. He did it the way a person manages a fire before it catches. After the 3rd time, Emily looked at him directly across the table and said quietly enough that it didn't carry, "You're doing it again." He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. Doing what? Maneuvering. "I'm making conversation," he said. "You're making conversation strategically," she said. There's a difference. Something moved in his eyes, brief, unreadable, but present. "You notice things," he said. "I'm told that's a useful habit." A pause. The corner of his mouth moved just slightly. "So it is," he said. Yund. He found her afterward in the small sitting room off the hall, where guests had gathered for tea before departing. He came to stand beside her, not beside her the way a man stands beside a woman he is pursuing, but beside her the way a man stands beside someone he has decided to speak honestly with, which was its own kind of notable. "I owe you an explanation," he said. She turned to look at him. "For tonight, for all of it." He held his teacup in a way that suggested he had no intention of drinking it. "I knew you would be here. Mrs. Harlow told me she'd invited you. I asked to be included." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man choosing a lie, but the quiet of a man choosing which truth to offer. "The night of my ball," he said. "I offered you 10 minutes because I thought you were going to do something inadvisable, something that would have given people a story they'd still be repeating at Christmas." "I know," she said, "but that isn't the whole reason." He looked at her steadily. "I've watched a great many people in that ballroom over the years. I know how they move when they're comfortable, and how they move when they're performing, and how they move when something has just knocked the floor out from under them." A pause. "You walked back into that room, and you looked like all 3 at once. And I've never in all the years I've hosted that event seen anyone manage all 3 at once." Emily felt something shift in her chest, careful and uncertain, like weight redistributing after a long time in one position. "That sounds more like curiosity than charity," she said. "It is," he said. "I am not particularly charitable, but I am curious, and I think—" He stopped, reconsidered, continued. "I think you've been managing the aftermath of that night in a way that most people wouldn't have managed. And I think the city is deciding whether to punish you for something that wasn't your fault. And I think that's wrong." He said the last word simply without drama, like a man stating a mathematical fact. She looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Harrington," she said, "what is it that you actually want?" He didn't hesitate. "I want to offer you something more substantial than 10 minutes, he said. "A public association. Sufficient to shift the conversation. Not permanent. Not—" He paused. "Not what you might fear it implies. Simply a recalibration of how this city sees you." "An arrangement," she said. "A temporary one." "And what do you get from it?" He looked at her. "I told you. I'm curious about you." He paused again, and this time the pause was different, slightly longer, slightly less controlled. "And I get to do something that is, as I said, the right thing. I don't often get the opportunity to do something purely because it's right. It's a luxury I find I'd like to afford." Emily thought about Edward calling her an arrangement. She thought about Lydia deciding the wrong things in order to do what she wanted. She thought about her father's face when he said it's done, and the invitations that had stopped, and Margaret Hale's forced warmth in the marketplace, and Nathaniel Harrington redirecting the table's attention 3 times without anyone knowing he was doing it. She thought about being 22 years old and standing in the ruins of the life she had planned and deciding what to do next. "I'll need to know the terms," she said. "Of course. Specific terms, nothing vague." "I wouldn't offer anything vague," he said. "I dislike vagueness." "And my father will need to know." "I assumed so." She looked at him. This man who moved through rooms like a man who owned them, which he often did, but who had stood at the edge of his own ballroom and watched her walk back into the fire with her head up, and who had, for reasons he'd just tried to explain, and she was beginning to almost believe, decided she was worth his attention. "All right," she said. "All right. I'll hear the terms," she said. "That's all I'm agreeing to. I'll hear them." Nathaniel Harrington set his untouched teacup on the nearest surface. "Then I'll call on your father Friday morning," he said. "If that suits." "It suits," she said. He gave her the smallest nod and acknowledgement, not quite a bow. Then he said with a flatness that she was beginning to understand was his particular brand of sincerity. "You're going to be fine, Miss Carter. I want you to know that I'm not saying it to be kind. I'm saying it because I've watched people in crisis for a long time, and some of them come through it, and some of them don't, and I can generally tell the difference." She held his gaze. "And which am I?" "You already know," he said. And before she could respond, he had turned and was crossing the room toward the senator, leaving her standing alone with her tea cooling in her hands, and something in her chest that was not quite hope, but was close enough to be alarming. She didn't let herself examine it. She finished her tea. She said her goodbyes. She rode home through the August dark, and she thought about terms and fathers and arrangements and the particular way a man looked at you when he wasn't performing looking. And she told herself very firmly that she was not going to read anything into any of it. She told herself that 3 times. By the 3rd time, she was not entirely sure she believed it. Nathaniel Harrington arrived at the Carter house on Friday morning at precisely 9 o'clock. Not 9:30, not 9:45. 9 o'clock, which was earlier than a social call had any business being, and which told Emily, who heard the door from the top of the stairs and recognized the knock as deliberate and unhurried, that this was not a social call. This was a man who had said he would come Friday morning and had decided that morning meant exactly what it said. She came downstairs to find him already in her father's study. She had expected her father to send for her. Instead, George Carter appeared in the doorway of the study, looked at her, and simply stepped aside. She walked in. Nathaniel stood near the window, not sitting, which she noticed immediately. He was the kind of man who stood in rooms rather than settled into them. He turned when she entered, and something in the way he did it, attentive, unhurried, as if he had been waiting for the right person to arrive before the conversation could properly begin, made her feel briefly like the room had been rearranged in her favor. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Harrington," she said. "You said you'd come." "I said Friday morning," he agreed. "I keep my word. It's simpler than the alternative." She took the chair across from her father's desk. Nathaniel remained standing. Her father settled into his chair and folded his hands on the desk and looked at Nathaniel with the expression of a man who has been in negotiations long enough to know that patience is the sharpest tool in the room. You said you had terms, George Carter said. I do, Nathaniel said. He spoke directly and without preamble, and Emily understood that this was simply how he operated, not from arrogance, but from a conviction that clarity was a form of respect. I'm proposing a period of visible public association between Miss Carter and myself. Attendance at the same social engagements. Enough frequency and consistency that the city's attention shifts from what happened at my ball 3 weeks ago to what appears to be happening now. And what appears to be happening now, George asked. That Nathaniel Harrington has taken a particular interest in George Carter's daughter, Nathaniel said. Which is enough. In this city, a man of my position expressing interest in a woman recalibrates everything around her. It doesn't erase what people think they saw, but it changes the story, and the story is what matters. George was quiet for a moment. And what do you get from this? I've been direct with your daughter about that, Nathaniel said. I get the satisfaction of doing something that is in my judgment right. I also get... He paused, and it was the first pause that felt like it cost him something. I get the company of someone who is worth my company, which is rarer than people assume. Emily felt the weight of that land somewhere in her chest. She did not look at him. Duration, her father asked. As long as it takes, Nathaniel said, which I estimate at 6 to 8 weeks of consistent appearances. After that, the narrative is established enough to hold itself. And at the end of 6 to 8 weeks, we part as friends or we don't part at all. A pause. That second possibility is not part of the formal terms. I mention it only for completeness. The room was very quiet. Emily looked at her father. Her father looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Emily. You understand, George said slowly, that this arrangement, if it becomes known as an arrangement, does more damage than the original situation. It won't become known, Nathaniel said, because it isn't an arrangement in the way you mean. I am genuinely interested in your daughter. The only thing being arranged is the timing and visibility of that interest. He held George's gaze. I'm not asking you to let me deceive anyone, Mr. Carter. I'm asking you to let me tell a true story in a useful order. George Carter looked at his daughter. Emily thought about everything she had felt and feared and held together over the past 3 weeks. She thought about the invitations that stopped and the ones that came from kindness she couldn't quite accept, and the moment in the marketplace when her hands had started shaking. She thought about what it had cost her to stay upright. She thought about sitting across from Nathaniel Harrington at that dinner table and watching him redirect the conversation 3 times without anyone knowing he was doing it. Father, she said quietly, I'd like to try. George held her gaze for a long moment. Then he exhaled slow and deliberate and looked back at Nathaniel. If my daughter's name suffers any additional damage from this, he said, you and I will have a very different conversation. Understood, Nathaniel said. He did not qualify it or soften it. He just agreed, and that simplicity was its own kind of assurance. George nodded. Then we're in accord. They began that same Sunday. The Old South Church on a Sunday morning was the most efficient social mechanism in Boston. What was seen there on Sunday morning was known by Monday noon. Nathaniel knew this. Emily knew this. They arrived separately, she with her father, he alone, and the arrangement was simple. He would cross the churchyard after the service and speak with her father, and she would be standing beside her father, and whatever anyone wished to conclude from that, they were welcome to conclude it. What they did not plan was Mrs. Aldrich. She materialized from the crowd with the speed of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this opportunity, her sharp eyes moving between Emily and Nathaniel like a woman adding numbers she is very pleased to have finally gotten. Mr. Harrington, she said, warmth flooding her voice. What a pleasure. I don't often see you at this service. I've been remiss, Nathaniel said pleasantly. I'm making corrections. And Miss Carter. Mrs. Aldrich's gaze settled on Emily with an expression that was not quite friendly. You look well. Better than I expected, given well. She stopped herself with the practiced grace of a woman who knows how to make an incomplete sentence do more work than a finished one. "Thank you," Emily said. "It's a fine morning." "It is." Mrs. Aldrich looked between them again. "Are you acquainted? Then I wasn't aware." "We were introduced at my ball," Nathaniel said. "I found Miss Carter's conversation worth continuing." He said it easily, without emphasis, in the tone of a man stating something that required no explanation because it was simply true. "I imagine we'll be continuing it for some time." The silence that followed was approximately 4 seconds long. Emily counted. Mrs. Aldrich blinked. Then she smiled, a different kind of smile than before, recalibrated its edges softer. "How lovely," she said. "How perfectly lovely." She excused herself within the minute. Emily waited until she was out of range. "You just told half of Boston," she said quietly. "Mrs. Aldrich will tell the other half by Tuesday," Nathaniel said. "It's more efficient than sending letters." She looked at him. He was watching Mrs. Aldrich move through the crowd with the expression of a man watching something go exactly where he predicted it would go. "You enjoy this," Emily said. "I don't dislike it," he said. "There's a distinction." The weeks that followed were unlike anything Emily had experienced. It was not that life became easy, it was that life became legible again, which was different, and in some ways harder. Because legibility meant she had to look at things clearly, rather than managing them in her peripheral vision. Nathaniel was at the Harlow dinner the following Thursday. He was at the concert at Faneuil Hall the Thursday after that. He was not always beside her. He was careful not to be always beside her because constancy suggested possession, and he was not offering possession, he was offering presence. But he was always visible. And the city, which watched everything and forgot nothing, and could read the placement of people in rooms the way scholars read texts, understood that Nathaniel Harrington was paying attention to Emily Carter. The invitations came back, not all at once, not with apology because this city did not apologize, but they came: the Aldrich dinner, the card parties, a garden luncheon that she had not been invited to in 2 years. They came back quietly, as if they had never stopped, as if the 3 weeks of absence had been a misunderstanding so minor as to be beneath mention. She accepted them all. She went. She was pleasant and interesting, and wore her best dresses, and said exactly the right things to exactly the right people, and when she came home, she sat in her room and felt the accumulated weight of it pressed down on her like a hand on her chest. She told herself it was worth it. She told herself it was working. She did not tell herself it was all right because she was not in the habit of lying to herself. It was at the Aldrich dinner, the first one in the 4th week, that Edward Whitmore appeared. She had not known he would be there. She would have prepared differently if she had known, would have arranged her face more carefully before she walked in. Instead, she was mid-conversation with a merchant's wife about the price of imported fabric when she heard his voice and went completely still. He was across the room. He had not yet seen her. He was laughing at something. Doing it well, Edward had always done things well. The performing of ease was perhaps his greatest skill, and he looked the same as he always had, which was somehow the most disorienting part. She had half expected him to look different, diminished maybe by what he'd done, but he looked handsome and composed and absolutely himself. "Miss Carter." She turned. Nathaniel was at her elbow. She had not seen him cross the room. She did not know how he had known in a crowded dining room that she needed him at her elbow at exactly this moment, but he was there. "He's here," she said. Her voice was low and very steady. She was proud of it. "I see him," Nathaniel said. "I didn't know he'd been invited." "Neither did I." Something moved in Nathaniel's voice, brief and cool. "But now we both know. What would you like to do?" She thought about it. The old instinct was to manage it, to position herself away from him, to keep her face pleasant and her movements deliberate, to get through the evening without a confrontation. But she was tired of managing. She had been managing for 4 weeks, and it was extraordinary how much energy managing required. "Nothing," she said. "I would like to do nothing. I would like to have my dinner and my conversation, and let him be irrelevant." Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression. She would have called it approval, except it was warmer than that. Then that's what we'll do, he said. They went into dinner. Edward found her 15 minutes in when the soup was being cleared. He crossed the room with the deliberateness of a man who has made a decision and intends to carry it through, and he came to stand at her elbow in a way that was meant to look casual and wasn't. "Emily," he said. She looked up. "Edward." Her voice was pleasant and entirely empty of anything that could be used. "You look well?" He glanced at Nathaniel, who was in conversation with the senator at the far end of the table and appeared to have no awareness that anything significant was happening at Emily's end. She knew better. "Thank you," she said. A pause. Edward's jaw worked slightly. "I've been hoping for an opportunity to speak with you, to clarify some things." "I don't think there is anything to clarify," she said. "Emily." His voice dropped. "What happened? It was a mistake. I want you to know that. The situation became complicated, and I handled it badly, and I know that. I've spoken with my father, and he agrees that if we—" "Edward." She set down her fork very carefully. "Stop." He stopped. "I'm going to say this once," she said, "and I'm going to say it quietly because I am at a dinner table, and I was raised with manners, and I will not give you or Mrs. Aldrich or anyone else in this room a scene tonight." She looked at him steadily. "We are finished. The engagement is dissolved. Whatever your father agrees or disagrees with is not my concern, and if you approach me again in a social setting to discuss what happened or to suggest that it might be revisited, I will be considerably less quiet about it." She picked up her fork again. "Is that clear?" Edward stared at her. Something moved in his face. She watched it, the rapid recalculation of a man who had expected a different conversation. He had expected tears, maybe, or ice, or the particular stiffness of a woman performing not caring. He had not expected this quiet, this clarity, this woman who was looking at him the way she might look at an obstacle she had already decided how to walk around. "Is that clear?" she repeated. "Yes," he said. The word came out flat. "Good evening, then," she said. He walked away. Her hands under the table were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs until they stopped. From the other end of the table, without looking up from his conversation with the senator, Nathaniel Harrington said something that made the senator laugh. His voice was relaxed and unhurried, like a man who had been having the same pleasant conversation for the last 10 minutes without interruption. Emily picked up her wine glass. She took a small, steadying sip. Then she turned back to her own conversation and kept going. The twist came on a Wednesday from a direction she had not considered. It came in the form of a letter delivered to the Carter house by hand, with no name on the outside except hers. She opened it in her room, standing at the window, afternoon light coming through the curtains. It was from Lydia. Not a letter of apology, she had already received 2 of those, and had read both and set both aside without responding. This was different. This letter was 3 pages written in Lydia's small, precise hand, and it began not with sorry, but with, "I think you should know." And what Lydia thought Emily should know was this: Edward Whitmore had never intended to break the engagement himself. He had, from the beginning of his involvement with Lydia, spoken of Emily in terms that were Lydia's word, transactional. Her family's connections, her father's reputation, the respectability she conferred. He had been explicit about it to Lydia, and Lydia, who had wanted to believe she was something real to him, had told herself that was simply how men spoke about business. But in the weeks since the ball, something had changed. Edward had begun. Lydia wrote to take a different interest in Emily. Not a romantic one, a strategic one. He had heard about Nathaniel Harrington's visible attention, and he had decided in his rapid, calculating way that a woman who could attract Nathaniel Harrington might be worth considerably more than he had originally valued her. He was not, Lydia wrote, finished with trying to get her back. Not because he wanted her, because he had done the arithmetic and found the answer inconvenient. Emily read the letter twice. Then she sat down on the edge of her bed and held it in her lap and thought about what it meant to be reduced to arithmetic by a man who had asked for your hand and called you his intended, and sat at your father's dinner table and looked him in the eye. She thought about being 22 years old and starting over. She thought about Nathaniel Harrington telling her father that he was telling a true story in a useful order. She reached for paper. She wrote to Nathaniel a short note, 4 lines: "I've received information I think you should be aware of before our next public engagement. Would you be available to speak privately this week?" She signed it and sealed it and gave it to the hallboy to deliver, and then she went back to the window and stood there for a long time watching the street below, watching Boston going about its ordinary business in the summer heat. She had thought the worst of it was behind her. She was beginning to understand that the worst of it was only now taking its proper shape. Nathaniel came the next morning. She had expected him in the afternoon or perhaps Friday. He came at 10 o'clock Thursday morning, which told her that her note had reached him in the evening, and he had read it and decided immediately that it was not something to postpone. She met him in the sitting room without her father, which was her choice. There was a line she had decided between using her father as a shield and simply being appropriately protected, and she was trying very carefully to live on the right side of it. She gave him the letter. He read it standing, which she had expected. He read it completely, which she had also expected. When he finished, he looked up, and his expression was... She searched for the word. Unsurprised. Not cold, but calibrated. "He's been watching us," Nathaniel said. "It would appear so. And he's decided that what I can offer you is worth reacquiring." He set the letter down on the table between them. "Which means he's going to make a move. Soon, I'd expect. Men like Whitmore don't deliberate once they've made a calculation." "What kind of move?" Emily asked. Nathaniel looked at her. "He'll try to speak with you privately, in a setting where I'm not present. He'll make a case for reconsideration, probably framed as regret, because that's the angle most likely to work on someone who spent a year believing he cared for her." A pause. "He'll be watching for a moment when your guard is down." "My guard isn't down," Emily said. "I know that." Nathaniel's voice was even. "He doesn't." She absorbed this. "So he's going to try to use the arrangement against itself. If I appear to be softening toward you, he'll interpret it as evidence that I'm available, emotionally, for a different kind of argument." "That's my reading," Nathaniel said. "And if he succeeds," she asked, "if he finds a moment and makes his case, and how does that affect you, practically?" He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face shifted, something she couldn't fully name, something that moved behind his composure, like weather behind glass. "It doesn't affect me practically," he said. "My practical position is unchanged regardless." "That's not what I asked," she said. Another pause, longer. "No," he said finally. "It isn't." The room was very quiet. She waited. She had learned in these weeks that Nathaniel Harrington did not respond well to pressure. He responded to patience. He operated at his own speed, and that speed was considered and exact, and if you pushed him, he simply held still until you stopped pushing. "If Whitmore succeeded," he said slowly, "if you reconsidered, I would accept that as your decision, and I would not question it." He met her eyes. "But I would like to be honest with you about the fact that it would matter to me. More than I initially intended it to." Emily felt something break open in her chest, not painfully, but suddenly like a window thrown wide in a room that has been shut too long. "How much more?" she said. "Considerably," he said. And then before she could respond, before she could push into that word and find everything she suspected might be behind it. "But that's not the matter at hand. The matter at hand is Whitmore." She closed her mouth. She took a breath. He was right. That was the matter at hand. "What do you suggest?" she asked. "I suggest," Nathaniel said, "that we stop being visible on a schedule and start being visible in response. Let him try to find a moment when I'm not present. He will find that those moments are considerably rarer than he's calculating." She understood what he was saying. The arrangement was becoming something else, something less structured and more instinctive, and he was naming it in a way that was almost but not quite a question. She thought about the word considerably. She thought about how he had said it simply, plainly, without decoration. "All right," she said. "All right." Stop letting him predict where we'll be, she said. I understand. I agree. Nathaniel picked up the letter. I'll keep this if you don't mind. I may need it. For what? He looked at her steadily. For the conversation I intend to have with Edward Whitmore. At a time of my choosing. She felt a chill move through her that had nothing to do with temperature. What kind of conversation? The kind, Nathaniel said quietly, that ends things. He moved faster than she expected. 3 days later, Emily was at the Monroe house. She had gone to see Lydia. The letter had sat with her for 3 days, and she had thought about it from every angle, and finally she had concluded that whatever she felt about Lydia, whatever complicated wreckage remained of that friendship, Lydia had told her the truth when she didn't have to, and that cost something, and she wanted to acknowledge it. Lydia met her in the parlor. She looked hollowed out, thinner than Emily remembered. Her usual brightness compressed into something careful and watchful. She had, Emily could see, been genuinely afraid that Emily wouldn't come. Thank you for the letter, Emily said. Lydia's hands tightened in her lap. I wasn't sure you'd read it. I read everything, Emily said. I always have. I know. A pause. I should have known that when it mattered more. They sat with that for a moment. Is it true? Emily asked. All of it. Yes, Lydia said. He said you were practical about the arrangement, that you knew what it was, that you'd be fine. Her voice dropped. I needed to believe that, so I did. And when you stopped believing it? When I saw your face in the library. Lydia's voice cracked. I saw your face, Emily, and I knew immediately, and I couldn't undo 4 months in that moment. I couldn't undo any of it. Emily looked at her. This person she had loved since they were 12 years old. This person who had made the worst possible choice and known it and done it anyway and lived with it for 4 months while looking Emily in the eye. I don't know if we can go back to what we were, Emily said. I want to be honest with you about that. I know. But I don't want to lose you entirely, Emily said. I don't know what that means yet. I don't know what shape it takes. But I wanted you to know that I read your letter, and I'm grateful you told me the truth. And She stopped. I'm trying. Lydia's eyes filled. She pressed her lips together. She nodded. They sat in silence for a while, which was uncomfortable and necessary, and its own kind of beginning. Emily left 20 minutes later. She was walking toward the street when she nearly collided with a man coming up the front path. Edward Whitmore stopped dead. She stopped dead. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them on Lydia Monroe's front path in the August heat, and she felt not fear, not longing, but a very clean and specific anger that had been waiting, she understood, for exactly this. Emily, he said. He said it carefully, the way he said everything now calibrated, managed. Edward, she said. I didn't know you'd be here. Clearly, she said. He looked at her, the rapid, practiced assessment she had learned to recognize. Measuring, calculating, finding angles. I've been hoping to speak with you. Without... He stopped himself. Without Mr. Harrington, she said. He didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. Whatever you're going to say, Emily said, I'd like you to consider very carefully whether it's worth saying. Because I know about the arithmetic, Edward. I know exactly what you've been calculating. And I want you to understand that what you valued me for my father's connections, my family's position, the respectability I conferred, none of that is going anywhere. It's mine. It belongs to me. And the man who has access to it is the man who earns it, not the man who assumed it was already his. Edward stared at her. We are finished, she said. We were finished the night of the ball. Everything since then has just been you refusing to accept a calculation that didn't go your way. She held his gaze. I suggest you accept it now, before it costs you more than it already has. She walked past him. She was halfway down the street before she heard the Monroe front door open and close. She didn't look back. She kept walking steadily, head level, the way she had learned to walk through all of it, like a woman who has somewhere more important to be. Nathaniel had told her to keep going until she believed it. She was starting, she realized cautiously, against her own better judgment, to believe it. And somewhere across the city, she knew without knowing Nathaniel Harrington was having a different kind of conversation with a different kind of man. And whatever happened in that conversation would change things again, and she would need to be ready. She kept walking. She found out what Nathaniel said to Edward, the same way she found out most things in Boston sideways, through someone who wasn't supposed to tell her. It was Margaret Hale who told her 4 days after Emily had walked past Edward on Lydia Monroe's front path. Margaret arrived at the Carter house on a Tuesday afternoon with a tin of tea cakes and the particular bright-eyed energy of a woman carrying information she has been sitting on for too long. They were barely through the pleasantries before Margaret leaned forward in her chair and said, "I have to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know, not because I'm well. You'll understand when I say it." Emily set down her teacup. "Go ahead." "My husband had business with Senator Harlow on Friday," Margaret said, "at the State House. And when he arrived, he passed Nathaniel Harrington in the corridor, coming out of a meeting." She paused. "Edward Whitmore was in that meeting." Emily went very still. "Robert said he'd never seen Edward Whitmore look the way he looked coming out of that room." Margaret continued. "He said Edward looked like a man who had just been shown something he didn't want to see and been told very quietly that other people could see it too." She watched Emily's face. "Robert doesn't know what was in that meeting, but he knows Nathaniel Harrington called it, and he knows it lasted less than 30 minutes. And he knows Edward Whitmore has not approached your name in public not once since Friday." The room was quiet. Emily thought about what Nathaniel had said. "I may need it." The letter. Lydia's letter with its precise account of what Edward had said and done and calculated. She thought about Nathaniel saying very simply, "For the conversation I intend to have with Edward Whitmore at a time of my choosing." "Did Robert say anything else?" Emily asked. "Only that when he mentioned it to Senator Harlow, the senator said—" Margaret hesitated. "He said Harrington doesn't often get involved in other people's business, but when he does, people tend to stay uninvolved afterward." Emily reached for her teacup. Her hand was steady. "Thank you, Margaret," she said. Are you all right?" "Yes," Emily said. And she meant it, which surprised her a little. She was all right. She was something past all right, something she didn't have a clean word for yet, something that sat in her chest with a warmth she was still deciding whether to trust. She didn't ask Nathaniel about it directly. She had thought about it, had rehearsed several versions of the question in her head, and each time she arrived at the same conclusion. He had done what he said he would do at a time of his choosing, and he had not told her in advance because he hadn't needed her permission and hadn't wanted to involve her. That was a decision she could respect, even if the not knowing had its own particular weight. What she did was write him a note. 2 sentences. "I've heard something of Friday. Thank you." He wrote back 4 words. It needed doing. Rest. She read those 4 words 3 times. She thought about a man who could negotiate a business empire and manage a room full of Boston's most powerful people and sit across a dinner table from her and say considerably, and then pivot back to the matter at hand. She thought about the word rest, how direct it was, how it assumed she needed it, how it didn't apologize for assuming. She put the note in her drawer with Lydia's letter and went to bed earlier than she had in weeks. The next morning brought a different kind of complication. Her father called her into his study before breakfast, which was unusual enough to put her on alert before she even sat down. He was standing at his desk, not sitting, and he had a letter in his hand that he held the way men hold things they have read more than once. "I received this yesterday," he said. "I waited until this morning because I wanted to read it again before I spoke to you." She took the letter. She read it. It was from James Whitmore, Edward's father. It was 3 pages of carefully composed language that said, essentially, the dissolution of the engagement was regrettable and had been based on a misunderstanding. That Edward had behaved poorly, but youth and ambition were mitigating factors that a generous spirit might take into account. That the Carter-Whitmore connection had been mutually beneficial and could continue to be so, and that James Whitmore would welcome the opportunity to discuss in a spirit of goodwill the possibility of a renewed understanding between the families. Emily read it twice. Then she set it on her father's desk. "He wants you to reconsider," her father said. "He wants you to pressure me to reconsider," Emily said. "He's written to you because he thinks you're more likely to see the business logic." She looked at her father. "Are you—" George Carter's expression was its own answer. "I'm showing you the letter because you have the right to know it exists. My response was written last night. I sent it this morning before you were awake." "What did you say?" "I said that the Carter family considers the matter closed, that any further communication on the subject of a renewed engagement would be unwelcome, and that I would strongly advise James Whitmore to direct his son's ambitions toward a family that has not already extended trust and been repaid with deception." He paused. "I said it more politely than that, but that is what it said." Emily looked at her father. She thought about how he had said yes immediately that first night in the carriage. How he had said, "Whatever it costs to be rid of him, we will pay it and consider it a bargain." "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "This is what fathers are for." She almost said something. She stopped herself because she was not going to cry in her father's study at 7 in the morning over a letter from James Whitmore. She had spent 6 weeks not crying in places where crying would be inconvenient, and she was not going to break that record over Edward's father. She went to breakfast. She ate her toast. She was fine. The letter from James Whitmore was still sitting in the back of her mind like a pebble in a boot when she saw Nathaniel 2 days later at a small gathering at the Harlow house. The senator's wife had developed a habit of hosting informal Thursday afternoons, and Emily had developed a habit of attending them, and Nathaniel had developed a habit of appearing at approximately the same time as Emily, which the senator's wife had developed a habit of facilitating without comment. He found her near the window, which was where she tended to stand when she needed to think and still be present. "You're quieter than usual," he said. "I have something on my mind." "The letter from James Whitmore." She turned to look at him. "How do you know about that?" "Because after my conversation with Edward, I expected his father to make exactly that move." A pause. "I should have warned you. I'm sorry." It was the first time she had heard him apologize for anything. It landed differently than she expected, not with the weight of a formal apology, but with the simple gravity of a man who said what he meant, and meant what he said, and didn't dress either one up unnecessarily. "My father handled it," she said. "I know. Your father is a capable man." "He is." She looked at Nathaniel. "Did you anticipate the letter, or did you know it was coming?" He held her gaze. "I anticipated it. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Anticipating it means I read James Whitmore correctly. Knowing it was coming would mean I had information I haven't told you about." He was very direct. "I don't have information I haven't told you about. I try not to operate that way." She believed him. That was the thing she kept arriving at from every direction she approached it. She believed him. Not blindly, not without question, but with the particular solidity of belief that has been tested and held. "There's something else," she said. He waited. "I've been thinking about the arrangement," she said. "About what it was when it started and what it seems to be now." She kept her voice even. "I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing." "We may not be," he said. "But I'd like to find out." She turned to face him fully. "When you said considerably, I meant it," he said. Not quickly, not defensively, just straight. "How long?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Since the night of the ball. Since you walked back into that room." "You didn't know me." "No, but I knew what it cost you, and I knew most people wouldn't have done it." He looked at her with the same directness he brought to everything. "I've been watching people navigate difficult things for a long time, Emily. Most of them bend. You walked straighter." She absorbed that. She thought about 6 weeks ago standing in a ballroom with her world in pieces, telling herself that being upright would have to be enough. She thought about how she had not known in that moment that anyone was watching. "I don't know what I feel," she said. "I want to be honest with you about that. There's been a great deal, and I'm still sorting through it. I don't think it's fair to tell you something I'm not certain of." "I'm not asking for certainty," he said. "I'm not certain either. I'm asking for honesty, which you just gave me." She looked at him. "The arrangement." "Forget the arrangement," he said quietly. "The arrangement served its purpose. What's happening now has nothing to do with arrangements." The room moved around them. Conversation, laughter, the soft sounds of an ordinary Thursday afternoon, and none of it touched the particular stillness that existed in the small space between them. "All right," she said. "All right." "I'll be honest with you," she said. "Even when I don't know yet what I'm being honest about." Something moved in his face. Not a smile exactly, something quieter and more particular than a smile. "That's all I'm asking," he said. Sag. The twist she had not seen coming arrived on a Saturday in the form of a woman she had never met. Her name was Catherine Alderton. She was 32, a widow of 4 years, the daughter of a prominent New Hampshire family, and she arrived in Boston society the way certain women arrive, with a complete absence of apology and an immediate and specific interest in Nathaniel Harrington. Emily heard about her first from the senator's wife, who mentioned her with the careful neutrality of a woman who is watching to see how the information lands. Then she heard about her from Margaret Hale, who was less careful and therefore more informative. Catherine Alderton was accomplished, well-connected, wealthy in her own right, and had, according to Margaret, made no secret of the fact that she had come to Boston with purpose. "What kind of purpose?" Emily asked. Margaret looked at her with an expression that said she was perhaps underestimating the directness of the question. "The kind," Margaret said, "that involves Nathaniel Harrington specifically." Emily kept her face entirely neutral. "I see. She's been introduced to him twice," Margaret said. "At the Aldrich dinner last week, which you weren't at, and at a trade gathering my husband attended. And Robert said—" She stopped. "Emily, are you all right?" "I'm perfectly well," Emily said. "What did Robert say?" "He said Harrington was polite to her, exactly as polite as he is to everyone." A pause. "Robert also said she was very beautiful and very direct, and he'd never seen a woman work a room the way she worked that one." Emily absorbed this with the careful equanimity of a woman who has had 6 weeks of practice absorbing difficult things. "Thank you, Margaret," she said. She went home and sat in her room for an hour, and she did not think about Catherine Alderton. She thought about Nathaniel saying, "Forget the arrangement." She thought about considerably. She thought about the 4-word note it needed doing rest. She thought about being 22 years old and sorting through the wreckage of one set of assumptions and not being sure she was ready to build another set in their place. Then she thought about something else. She thought about the fact that in 6 weeks, Nathaniel Harrington had been present at every gathering she attended, had redirected conversations on her behalf without being asked, had managed Edward Whitmore in a meeting she hadn't known about until afterward, had answered her questions directly and her silences with patience, and had used the word considerably and then not taken it back. She thought about a man who keeps his word because it's simpler than the alternative. She stood up. She wrote a note. Not to Nathaniel, to the senator's wife. She accepted the invitation to the Monday evening dinner that she had been deliberating about for 3 days. Catherine Alderton, she had learned, would be there. Emily did not examine too closely why she made that decision. She made it, sealed the letter, and sent it. The Monday dinner was 12 people in a room that felt smaller than 12 because Catherine Alderton had a quality that compressed space. She was everything Margaret had said, beautiful, direct, capable of filling a conversation without monopolizing it, with the particular ease of a woman who has been comfortable in rooms like this her entire life. Emily watched her from across the table and felt something she refused to call jealousy, because jealousy required a claim she had not made, and she was not in the habit of claiming things she hadn't established her right to. She called it instead assessment. Catherine Alderton was interesting. That was the honest conclusion. She was interesting and formidable, and she looked at Nathaniel when she spoke to him with the directness of a woman who had decided something and was acting on it. Nathaniel, for his part, was exactly what Robert Hale had described: polite. attentive in the way he was attentive to everyone fully present, genuinely listening, but offering nothing that could be read as particular. Except that 3 times during dinner, without appearing to do it deliberately, he said something that brought the table's attention to Emily. Not her situation, not her history to her specifically, her opinion on the tariff question, her knowledge of a particular shipping matter, an observation she'd made that he referenced as if it were the most natural thing in the world to reference. He was, she realized, doing what he had done at the ball 7 weeks ago. Redirecting, positioning, telling a true story in a useful order. But this time she understood with a clarity that sat low and certain in her chest that he wasn't doing it for the arrangement. The arrangement was over. He was doing it because he wanted to. After dinner in the sitting room, Catherine Alderton found Emily near the fireplace. "Miss Carter," she said. Her voice was warm and direct, like the rest of her. "I've been hoping for a moment. I understand you're well acquainted with Mr. Harrington." Emily looked at her steadily. "We're acquainted, yes. He speaks of you with a great deal of specificity," Catherine said. The word was careful and deliberate. "I've noticed that about him. He's not a man who speaks of most people with any specificity at all. They're simply present. Or not." She tilted her head slightly. "You're different." Emily said nothing. She waited. "I came to Boston with a purpose," Catherine said. "I won't pretend otherwise. I heard about Nathaniel Harrington, his position, his reputation, and I came to see for myself." She paused. "I've seen. And what I've seen is that he is already very specifically occupied. In a way that he may not have named yet, but that is legible to anyone paying attention." She looked at Emily with an expression that was remarkably without malice. "I thought you should know." Emily absorbed this. "Why are you telling me?" she asked. "Because I'm a widow who has spent 4 years watching people talk around things rather than say them?" Catherine said. "And I've run out of patience for it." A pause. "And because I think if the situation were reversed, I would want to know." She excused herself and moved toward another part of the room, leaving Emily standing alone by the fireplace, with her heart doing something complicated in her chest. She stood there for 30 seconds. 40. She watched the room. She found Nathaniel on the far side in conversation with the senator, his back half-turned, completely unaware of what had just happened beside the fireplace. She watched him for a moment. Just a moment. Then she crossed the room. He turned when she reached him the way he always turned when she was near, with that full attention, that unhurried focus, as if whatever he had been doing before was simply what he had been doing while he waited for the thing that mattered to arrive. "I need to speak with you," she said. "Not tonight, but soon." He looked at her. Something in his face went quiet in the way it went quiet when he was paying attention to everything. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. "My house," he said. 10 o'clock. I'll tell the housekeeper you're expected." She nodded. She went back to her place near the fireplace. She stayed until it was appropriate to leave, and she said the right things to the right people. And she did not look at Nathaniel again, not because she was avoiding him, but because she had already decided what she was going to say tomorrow, and looking at him would only make it harder to hold the decision steady until morning. She arrived at the Harrington house at 10 o'clock. He met her in the front hall himself, which she had not expected. The housekeeper hovered briefly and then disappeared with the tact of an experienced member of staff. And Nathaniel led Emily to the same room, the library, which she had not been in since the ball, and which was different in daylight, larger somehow and quieter. He gestured to a chair. She sat. He sat across from her, and he waited because he always waited. "Catherine Alderton told me something last night," she said. Something moved in his face, a brief, sharp alertness. "What did she say?" "She said you speak of me with specificity, that it's legible to anyone paying attention that you're occupied." She kept her voice steady. "She said she thought I should know." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Alderton is perceptive," he said finally. "Yes," Emily agreed. "She is." A pause. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me directly, without managing it." "I'll try," he said. "Is she right?" He looked at her. The room was very still. The summer heat was already building outside, the kind of Boston August morning that promised a sweltering afternoon. And inside the library, it was cool and dim and absolutely quiet. "Yes," he said. One word, no qualification. She breathed. "I've been telling myself," she said slowly, "that I don't know what I feel, that it's too soon, that I went through something significant and I'm still sorting through it, and it wouldn't be fair to you or to myself to act on something I'm not certain of." She looked at her hands. Then she looked at him. "And all of that is true. All of it." "I know," he said. "But I've also been telling myself those things," she continued, "partly because they're true and partly because they're safe. Because feeling certain of something means you can lose it. And I've recently learned what it feels like to lose something you were certain of, and I don't—" She stopped, breathed again. "I don't want to be afraid of this. I don't want the thing Edward did to make me afraid of everything that comes after it." Nathaniel leaned forward very slightly, his elbows on his knees, his hands loose, his full attention on her face. "You're not afraid of it," he said quietly. "You're being careful. There's a difference. And the difference matters." "How do you know?" "Because afraid would have you running. Careful has you here in this room, telling me the truth." He held her gaze. "I told you once that I'm curious about you. That's still true. But it's more than that now. I think you know that." "I do," she said. "I'm not asking you to decide anything today," he said. "I'm not asking you for certainty. I told you that before, and I meant it." A pause. "What I'm asking is that you stop treating what you feel as a problem to be managed and start treating it as something that belongs to you. That's yours. That you're allowed to have." She thought about 6 weeks ago, about walking back into a ballroom with the floor knocked out from under her and telling herself that being upright would have to be enough. She thought about being 22 and starting over. She thought about how starting over had led her through a library door and a dinner table and a front path and a statehouse corridor and a fireplace conversation with a widow who ran out of patience for people talking around things, had led her with the particular logic of things that were always going to happen to this room this morning. This man who said rest, like it was a complete sentence, and meant it. She thought about the word considerably and how it had been sitting in her chest for 3 weeks, like a door she kept walking past without opening. She stood up. He stood with her instinctive immediate. She crossed the small distance between their chairs and stopped close enough that she could see the particular steadiness in his eyes, the thing behind his composure that she had been reading piece by piece for 6 weeks. "Nathaniel," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. She felt him register it, a slight change in his breathing, barely perceptible. "Emily," he said. "I'm going to stop being careful for 30 seconds, she said. "And then I'm going to be careful again. But I need 30 seconds first." "Take them," he said. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw. He went very still, not with surprise, but with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting for something to arrive and is holding himself steady so as not to startle it away. She kissed him. It was brief. It was not tentative. It was the kiss of a woman who has made a decision and is enacting it, and when she pulled back, she found him looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, unguarded, unhurried, and entirely real. 30 seconds, she said. "Yes," he said. "I meant what I said," she told him. "I don't know everything yet. I'm still sorting." "I know," he said. "So am I. But I'm done treating it like a problem." "Good," he said. "And the simplicity of it, the flat, direct absolutely." Nathaniel Harrington's simplicity of it made her laugh short and surprised, and something in his face opened when she laughed in a way that she understood immediately and completely she was going to want to see again. She stepped back. She straightened her dress. She was practical by nature, and 30 seconds was 30 seconds. "I should go," she said. "I know," he said. "My father will want to know what happened at 10 o'clock. I'll call on him Friday," Nathaniel said, "if that suits." She looked at him. "What will you tell him?" "The truth," Nathaniel said, "in a useful order." She was still smiling when she walked out of the Harrington house and into the August morning, and she didn't stop for a long time. She was still smiling when Friday came. Not constantly. She was not the kind of woman who walked around smiling at nothing, and the days between Tuesday and Friday were full enough of ordinary things to keep her grounded. Her father's accounts needed reviewing. A letter from her aunt in Philadelphia required answering. The household ran on attention, and she gave it attention the way she always had, because the work of a life didn't pause, because something significant had shifted inside it. But in the quiet moments, the 10 minutes before breakfast, when the house was still, the walk back from the lending library on Thursday afternoon, she found it there. The smile, low and private like a candle in a room with the curtains drawn. Warm. Hers. She had not told her father what happened at the Harrington house on Tuesday. She had come home, answered his questions about the morning, with the truth arranged in its least alarming order. She had gone to speak with Nathaniel. The conversation had been productive. They had reached an understanding, and her father had looked at her with the eyes of a man who had 22 years of practice reading his daughter and said simply, "Good." She knew he would ask more on Friday. She knew Nathaniel would come as promised, and she knew whatever happened in that meeting would be the next thing. The real thing. The thing that moved beyond 30 seconds and arrangements and useful orders, and into the territory of what they were actually building. She was ready. She was also in the most private part of herself terrified. Those two facts coexisted without contradiction, which she was beginning to understand was simply what it felt like to be alive and paying attention. Nathaniel arrived at 9:55. 5 minutes early, which she had not expected. In 6 weeks of association, she had learned to read his punctuality as a language 10 o'clock meant. 10 o'clock 9 meant 9, and half past anything was a rounding error he didn't make. 5 minutes early meant something. It meant he had not been able to make himself wait the full interval. She heard the door. She stayed in the sitting room. She heard her father's man take his hat. She heard her father come out of the study and greet him, and she heard Nathaniel's voice, measured unhurried, the particular register he used when he was being deliberate about being calm. Then her father's voice. "Emily." She came into the hall. Nathaniel looked at her the same way he always looked at her, fully, directly, without performance. But there was something else in it now, something that hadn't been there before Tuesday. A warmth that lived just beneath the surface of his composure, like heat beneath still water. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Harrington," she said. Her father looked between them with the expression of a man who has just confirmed something he already suspected. "Come in," he said. "Both of you." Betrayal. They sat in the study, her father behind his desk, Emily in the chair she always took Nathaniel across from her. The same configuration as the first morning 7 weeks ago. But the room felt different. Everything in it felt different, the way the same words read differently depending on what you know when you arrive at them. Nathaniel spoke first, which was not a surprise. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I want to be direct with you." "I expect nothing less," George said. "The arrangement we discussed 7 weeks ago has run its course," Nathaniel said. "It accomplished what it was meant to accomplish. Your daughter's position in this city is restored, more than restored in my estimation. Whatever story was being written about her in the days after my ball has been entirely replaced by a different story, and that replacement is permanent." He paused. "That's not what I'm here to discuss." George waited. "I'm here to tell you that my interest in your daughter is not and was not limited to the arrangement. I was honest with both of you about that from the beginning. What I didn't anticipate." Another pause, and this one cost him something. She could see it. What I didn't anticipate was the degree of it, or the speed. Her father's hands were folded on his desk. His expression was attentive, and revealed nothing which was his particular skill. "Go on," he said. "I'm not asking for anything formal today," Nathaniel said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here to negotiate terms or make proposals. I'm here because Emily told me she would be honest with me even when she didn't know yet what she was being honest about, and I intend to extend her the same courtesy, which means being honest with her father as well. He looked at George steadily. I am serious about your daughter. I intend to court her properly with your knowledge and your permission, and I am asking you to tell me honestly if there is any reason I should not. The room was very quiet. Emily looked at her father. George Carter was looking at Nathaniel Harrington with the particular measuring attention of a man who has been building things his entire life and knows the difference between a solid foundation and a beautiful facade. You're 35 years old, George said. You've never married. You've never, to my knowledge, courted anyone seriously. Half of Boston wonders why, and the other half has invented reasons. He paused. I'd like to hear yours. Something in Nathaniel's expression shifted the composure held, but beneath it something moved that Emily had not seen before. Something older than the conversation, older than 7 weeks. I was engaged, Nathaniel said. 11 years ago. A woman in New York. We had an understanding for 2 years. He was very still. She chose someone else. Not because she didn't. He stopped, restarted more carefully. She chose someone with a larger fortune and a more established family name. It was a practical decision. She told me so herself, which I have always considered in the years since the only honest thing about the situation. Emily heard this and felt the shape of it settle into everything she already knew about him. The deliberateness, the precision, the way he told true stories in useful orders because he had learned at 24 years old what it cost to be told something less than the truth by someone who owed you better. I decided after that, Nathaniel continued, that I would not invest again unless I was certain, not of outcome. You can never be certain of outcome, but of character, of... He paused, choosing the word carefully. Of what a person is made of when the floor goes out from under them. George looked at him for a long moment. And my daughter showed you that. Your daughter showed me that at a ball in my own house, Nathaniel said. When she walked back into a room that had just decided something about her and she walked straight into the middle of it and didn't break. A pause. I have been watching people for 11 years, Mr. Carter. I know what I was looking for, and I know when I've found it. The room held its silence. Then George Carter unfolded his hands and set them flat on his desk and said, You have my permission. She walked Nathaniel out herself. Her father, who understood when a room was better left to 2 people, stayed in his study. They stood in the front hall, and Nathaniel had his hat in his hands, and Emily was looking at him with the full weight of what had just happened in that room pressing pleasantly against her sternum. You told him about New York, she said. Yes. You didn't tell me. No. He held her gaze. I was going to. When it felt right. It felt right today. She thought about 11 years of deliberateness. 11 years of watching rooms and keeping his own counsel and waiting with the patience of a man who had learned that patience was the only honest response to uncertainty for something worth investing in. I'm sorry, she said, about what happened to you. Don't be, he said. It made me careful, and careful as it turns out. He paused. Can be the thing that leads you to the right place. She understood he was giving her own word back to her. Careful. She had said it, and he had kept it, and now he was returning it with something else attached, with the implication that careful for both of them had led here. She reached out and took his hand. Not the way she had kissed him on Tuesday, not with the 30-second suspension of caution. This was different. This was slower and more deliberate and more completely hers. He looked down at their hands, then at her face. Friday again, she said. Every Friday, he said, if that suits. It suits, she said. He left. She stood in the hall for a moment, his absence still warm in it, and then she turned and went back into the house and began the entirely ordinary and completely extraordinary work of figuring out what came next. What came next arrived faster than she expected and from the direction she least anticipated. It was Lydia. 3 weeks after the meeting in her father's study on a Tuesday morning that had started with rain and cleared into the kind of sharp blue September that felt like an argument for staying alive. Emily answered a knock at the front door herself because she happened to be nearby when it came. Lydia was standing on the step. She looked different from the last time Emily had seen her. Not hollowed out. Not the compressed, watchful version of herself that had sat in the Monroe parlor with her hands tight in her lap. She looked like a woman who had made a decision. The set of her jaw said it. The fact that she had come to the front door and knocked, rather than sending a note, said it. "I know I should have written first," Lydia said. "I couldn't make myself wait for a reply." Emily looked at her for a moment. Then she stepped back. "Come in." They sat in the same sitting room where Emily had received Margaret Hale's tea cakes and information back in the weeks when everything was still raw. It felt like a longer time ago than it was. "I need to tell you something," Lydia said. "And I need to tell you before you hear it from someone else, because if you hear it from someone else first, I'll have made the same mistake twice." Emily went very still. "What is it?" Lydia's hands were in her lap, very quiet. "My father has had several conversations with the Monroe family solicitor over the past month, about Edward," she paused, "and about certain financial irregularities in the Whitmore trading accounts." Emily stared at her. "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind," Lydia said carefully, "that don't survive close examination. The kind that several of the men he's been in business with are now examining very closely indeed." She met Emily's eyes. "I don't know exactly what Nathaniel Harrington said to Edward in that meeting. My father won't tell me everything, but I know that whatever he said, it set something in motion. And what it set in motion has been moving since August." Emily thought about the letter from James Whitmore, the request for renewed consideration, the polite, practiced language of a man trying to put something back together that had come apart. She thought about her father's response sent before breakfast, and she thought about Nathaniel saying, "I may need this," about Lydia's letter. "Nathaniel didn't just warn him off," she said slowly. "No," Lydia said. "I don't think so." Emily sat with this. She felt something complex move through her. Not satisfaction exactly, but the particular solemnity of understanding that the world was larger and more interconnected than she had been tracking, and that things had been happening in rooms she hadn't been in. "Edward," she said. "What happens to him?" "I don't know yet," Lydia said. "His father is trying to manage it, but—" She stopped. "Emily, what Edward was doing in those accounts, it wasn't new. It had been going on for years, before you, before me. He's been building himself on borrowed foundations for a long time, and the foundations are cracking." "He came to me because he needed my father's money," Emily said. It wasn't a question. "He came to you because he needed your father's connections and your family's reputation to cover ground he couldn't cover himself," Lydia said. "The money was part of it, but it was more than money. It was legitimacy. He needed to be attached to something real because what he'd built was not." She looked at Emily directly. "You were always the real thing in that arrangement, Emily. He was the one who wasn't." The room was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" Emily asked. "Because you deserve to know." Lydia paused. "And because I owe you the truth. Every piece of it, not just the pieces that make me look less complicit." Her voice dropped slightly. "I knew things about Edward's business that I should have questioned. I didn't question them because I didn't want to. And that made me part of it, even if I wasn't at the center." She looked at her hands. "I'm not proud of that." Emily looked at her oldest friend, at the face she had known her whole life, which was also the face that had looked her in the eye for 4 months and said nothing. Both things were true. She had been working on holding both things true simultaneously, and some days she managed it better than others. "I appreciate you telling me," Emily said. "Is that all?" Lydia asked quietly. Emily thought about it. "No," she said. "It's not all, but I don't know yet how to say the rest of it. I'm still working on it." Lydia nodded. She stood. "I know," she said. "I'm working on it too." She left. Emily sat alone in the sitting room for a while, and she thought about foundations, real ones and borrowed ones, and about what it meant to build something on truth versus something on need, and about how the difference wasn't always visible from the outside until it was.
Fiancé.
She told Nathaniel about Lydia's visit that Friday. He listened the way he always listened, completely without interrupting, his attention undivided. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I should tell you what happened in that meeting," he said. She had been waiting for this. She had told herself she would not push for it, and she had kept that promise. But she had been waiting. "I showed Edward 3 things," Nathaniel said. The first was Lydia's letter, which he didn't know existed, and which established a documented account of his conduct from a witness who had direct knowledge of it. He paused. "The second was a summary that my solicitor had prepared at my request, reviewing the Whitmore family's trading accounts over the past 5 years. I had been in business with James Whitmore briefly 8 years ago. I knew enough to know where to look." Emily stared at him. "You had your solicitor review his accounts before the meeting." "I began that review the week after the ball," Nathaniel said, "when I decided I was going to be involved. You knew even then that you might need it." "I suspected," he said. "A man who conducts himself the way Edward conducted himself with you and Lydia doesn't contain that behavior to his personal life. It's a pattern. I suspected where else the pattern might appear." She thought about this. About the careful, deliberate, unhurried precision of a man who decides something and then moves toward it with complete attention. "What was the third thing?" she asked. He looked at her steadily. "The third thing was the conversation itself. I told him that whatever he chose to do next, whether he attempted to contact you, whether he attempted to manage the story, whether he attempted to involve your father's business in his problems, I would be watching. And that I had sufficient information, sufficient connections, and sufficient interest in the outcome to make his life extremely complicated if he gave me reason to." A pause. "I told him this without raising my voice. It wasn't a threat. It was an accounting of facts." Emily sat with this for a long moment. "You did all of that," she said slowly, "in August, before the dinner at the Harlow house, before Tuesday, before my father's study. Yes. Before you knew where this was going." He met her eyes. "I knew where I wanted it to go," he said. "I didn't know if you'd want the same thing. But I wasn't going to leave him with leverage over your life regardless." She felt something move through her that was larger than gratitude and more specific than love, and didn't quite have a word yet, the particular feeling of being known by someone who saw you clearly and acted accordingly without asking permission or expecting credit. "Nathaniel," she said. "Emily, you are the most deliberate person I have ever met." Something moved in his face, the quiet, particular thing that happened behind his composure when she surprised him. "I'll take that as a compliment," he said. "It is one," she said. "Ja, dank." September moved into October, and October brought a crispness to the Boston air that felt like the city exhaling after a long summer held under pressure. The leaves turned. The harbor traffic shifted. The social calendar contracted and reorganized around autumn rhythms, and Emily moved through it differently than she had moved through anything in her life before, with a solidity she had built herself piece by piece in the months since the night everything burned. The news about Edward Whitmore's accounts spread in the way such things spread, not all at once, not as scandal exactly, but as the kind of murmur that enters a room quietly and doesn't leave. 2 of his business partners withdrew from a proposed venture. A third requested an independent accounting. James Whitmore appeared less frequently at the gatherings where he had previously been a fixture, and when he appeared alone. Emily did not follow the details closely. She followed them just enough to know the shape of things, and then she turned her attention elsewhere, because Edward Whitmore had occupied too much of her thinking already, and she had better uses for her mind. She thought instead about Nathaniel, about Friday mornings in her father's study, which had become something she organized her weeks around without exactly meaning to, About the way their conversations moved, the ease of it, the substance of it, the fact that he never once spoke down to her about business or politics or any of the things that men in this city treated as their exclusive territory, but talked with her the way he talked with the senator or her father, as if her opinion was a resource rather than a courtesy. About the evening in late September, when they walked in the common after a dinner at the Harlow house properly with her father's knowledge, which was different from the structured visibility of the arrangement, and felt different in her body, lighter somehow more real. And Nathaniel said something about the water, and she laughed, and he turned and looked at her laughing with that expression she had been collecting since August, the open, unguarded one, the one that lived under everything else. She was building something. She knew it. She was building it carefully with both hands, the way she had learned to build things, paying attention to the foundation. The letter from Edward came in October. Third week, a Wednesday. She recognized the handwriting on the outside and stood in the hall with it for a full minute before she opened it. It was short, 2 paragraphs. The first acknowledged in language that was careful not to be an apology, but orbited one that he had conducted himself poorly, and that the dissolution of their engagement had been appropriate. The second, and this was the part that took her a moment to read correctly, said that he had begun to understand the extent of certain errors in his business conduct, and that in the process of that understanding, he had come to see that the errors had not begun with his accounts. He did not ask for anything. He did not suggest anything. He said, "I hope you are well." And he signed it. Emily read it twice. Then she went to her father's study and left it on his desk with a note, "For your records. Nothing required from me." She felt clean afterward. Not victorious. She was not interested in victory. Clean. The way a room feels when you've opened the windows after a long winter. She wrote to Lydia that same afternoon. Not about Edward. About something Lydia had mentioned in passing, a book she was reading, a garden project she was attempting, small things, ordinary things. The kind of things that had filled their letters when they were 18 and 20, and the world was simpler. She wrote 2 pages and signed it "Your friend," which was not everything it used to be, but was also not nothing. Lydia wrote back within the week. 4 pages. They were finding their way to something that wasn't what they had been and wasn't yet what it might become, moving through it the way you move through difficult terrain, slowly, with attention, one step tested before the next. The twist she had not seen coming arrived on a Thursday evening in the last week of October, and it arrived in the form of a question Nathaniel asked in the middle of what had been up to that point, a completely ordinary dinner at the Harlow house. They were walking back through the hall, coats being retrieved. The senator's wife saying the things hostesses say at the end of an evening, and Nathaniel leaned slightly toward her and said very quietly, "Will you walk with me? Not home, just walk." She looked at him. His expression was composed as always, but there was something behind it that she recognized now after months of learning to read it, the slight tension of a man who has decided something and is in the act of carrying it through. "Yes," she said. They walked. The October air was cold, and the street was quiet, and their breath was visible in the dark, and he said nothing for the first 3 minutes, which she did not find strange, because she had learned to live inside his silences, the way she lived inside her own. Then he said, "I want to tell you something." "Tell me," she said. "I have been waiting," he said, "to feel certain. Not of you, I told you before. I'm not asking for certainty of outcome, but of myself." He paused. "I wanted to be sure that what I feel is what I think it is, that I haven't mistaken one thing for another." She walked beside him and said nothing and waited. "I'm sure," he said. "I want you to know that. I'm not asking anything tonight. I'm just telling you." He turned and looked at her, and the street lamp caught his face, and she could see every bit of it, everything that was usually managed and composed and carefully presented, and none of it was managed right now. All of it was simply present, simply his, simply honest. "I love you. I don't know when it started exactly. Probably in that ballroom. Probably the moment you picked your hands up off that library door and squared your shoulders and walked back in." The street was very quiet. She stopped walking. He stopped with her. She looked at him. This man who had kept his word, because it was simpler than the alternative, who had told true stories in useful orders, who had shown up at 9:55 because he couldn't make himself wait the full interval, who had built a protection around her life before she knew she needed it, and never once asked for credit, who had said rest, like it was a complete sentence and meant every word of it. She thought about 30 seconds. About being careful. About the difference between afraid and careful, and how careful had led her here in an October street with her breath in the air and her heart entirely awake. "I know when it started for me," she said. He looked at her. "Thursday dinner," she said. "The first one at the Harlow house, when you redirected the conversation 3 times without anyone knowing you were doing it." She held his gaze. "I noticed. And I thought that is a man who does things because they're right, not because anyone is watching." A pause. "I didn't know what to do with that yet. But that's when it started." Something happened to his face. She had no other way to describe it. Something happened, a loosening, a warmth, a coming forward of everything he kept behind the composure, and he looked for one unguarded moment like a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just been told he doesn't have to anymore. "Emily," he said. "Nathaniel," she said. He took her hand. Not with ceremony, not with the gesture of a man making a point, simply directly the way he did everything. She held on. They stood in the street in the October cold, with the city quiet around them, and everything that had happened between July and this moment present in the air between them. The library and the ballroom, and the 10 minutes, and the 30 seconds, and the Fridays, and the letter from James Whitmore, and the walk on the common, and Lydia's letter, and a meeting at the State House, and a woman named Catherine Alderton, who ran out of patience for people talking around things. All of it present, all of it real, all of it, the foundation on which they were standing. "Friday," he said. "Friday," she agreed. "I'll speak with your father." "He already knows," she said. "He's known since August." Nathaniel looked at her. Something moved in his eyes, surprised briefly, and then not. "Of course he has," he said. She laughed. He laughed. It moved between them like something loosened. They walked home through the October dark side by side, and she thought about what it meant to start over, how she had understood it in July, as a loss, a subtraction, a walking away from something she had believed in. She understood it differently now. Starting over was not subtraction, it was excavation. You cleared away what had been built on borrowed foundations, and underneath, if you were willing to look, if you were willing to stay upright long enough, you found the ground, solid, real, yours. She had found hers. On the first Friday of November, Nathaniel Harrington sat in George Carter's study and asked formally and directly, and without preamble, for permission to court George's daughter with the intention of marriage. He stated his position, his means, and his intentions, with the same precision he brought to every contract he had ever negotiated, and then he stopped talking and waited. George Carter looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "You have my permission, and my blessing. They are different things, and you have both." Nathaniel stood and shook his hand. Emily, who was not in the study, heard the handshake from the hall, because she had been standing in the hall since 9:58. Because she had learned in the 4 months since the night everything burned that some things are worth arriving for early. She was smiling when the door opened. Nathaniel came out and looked at her, and she looked at him, and there was nothing complicated in it, nothing that needed management or arrangement or useful ordering. It was simply 2 people in a hallway on a November morning, standing in the life they had built together out of honesty and patience, and the refusal to be anything other than upright when the floor went out. She took his arm. He covered her hand with his. And Emily Carter, who had walked into a summer ball with the wrong life and walked out with nothing but her own spine and her father's hand and the knowledge that she was still standing. Emily Carter walked forward into November with the right man at her side and the ground solid beneath her feet, and she did not look back. She had always known where she was going. She had simply needed time to find the road that was truly hers. And now that she had found it, she intended to walk it all the way to the end.